Split Second is a racing game known for its insane difficulty and its unfair rubber banding mechanics, leading many players to retry the same events many times or even to rage quit. But despite that, I thought it wasn't hard enough, and I decided to make an entire 100% playthrough of the game, with a major handicap. I'm gonna restrict my entire playthrough to one car, and this car is the Ryback Brawler, the first car in the car selection menu, and one of the 3 starter cars the game has to offer. This car has a pretty bad acceleration and top speed, but it's pretty good in the turns if you drive it well. It's a very competent car on airplane graveyard and power plant, for example, but it will struggle on tracks like Port Bridge. The rules for this challenge are simple. I have to use the Brawler for every event in any game mode apart from detonators. I am allowed to use the car that is given to me to complete the detonators because I have no other way to use any other car for it. And since this is a 100% playthrough, I'm gonna have to finish first in every single event of the season mode. Now that the rules are clear, let's jump right into it. It was obvious that some categories of events were gonna be easier than others. Airstrikes, for example, have no time limit to complete them. Survival was about as hard as usual, Air Revenges have extremely easy times to beat to get first, and Detonators force you to get the same car as usual. The difference is sick in races and elimination game modes, where the opponents are going to be faster and faster as we progress through the game, while our car's performance will remain the same for the entire playthrough. The first hour of the run is actually pretty easy as the AIs are still programmed to compete against early game cars. I quickly reached the first elite race where Vixen shows me his ability to go through vehicles, but this is definitely not enough to impress me since I easily take the win by a significant gap of... Oh yeah, I forgot that the opponents could even rubber band after I crossed the finish line. And about the leaderboard, everything is going as it's programmed to be, with Raptor being second and Rig being stone dead last. Anyway, I managed to finish this episode in only 22 minutes and 22 seconds, and at this point, I'm thinking it's gonna be my fastest episode in the entire run. Right after that, it's time for the second episode, which isn't more difficult. I take the win on every event on my first attempt, just like in the first episode. This episode, however, is also where I'm gonna have my first crash, as I got sandwiched between 2 opponents before the last turned off very wharf. The elite race was also quite easy since I couldn't even see the opponents behind me before crossing the finish line. The leaderboard is obviously staying the same, and I can move on to episode 3. The third episode, besides being the one where I did my second and third crashes of the run, is also the episode where I performed those really satisfying drifts. But it was still easy enough to sneak my way through the elite race by first trying every event. I expected the Ferry Wharf elite race to be a bit tougher than the previous ones, but I won quite easily as I already pulled away halfway through the race. And to our surprise, the leaderboard remains unchanged. That leads us to episode 4, which was overall not much harder than the rest. It's containing 2 detonators, which is the easiest thing I can get, and the 3 races aren't a challenge at all for me, but it's when I reach the Port Bridge Elite race that the run is actually starting. The first challenge of the playthrough, the first time I actually have to retry an event. Vixen and Raptor finally decided to activate the rubber banding mechanics. This race also introduced me to a new unexpected enemy that was gonna cause me a lot of trouble later in the run. Wrecked cars. When you wreck an opponent, his corpse will stay in the middle of the road and can slow you down quite a lot if you hit it. I didn't stay stuck on this race for too long though, as I managed to take the win in my third attempt. As expected, the leaderboard remains the same as before. That slight increase in difficulty would quickly disappear however as I went through the 5th episode without any trouble. I got some close calls though, like this 1/10 finish on Expressway, which is my closest finish so far. The AIs also started to show themselves a bit more aggressive in the Downtown Central Elite race, where I got pushed into a crane by a very angry Livewire, killing himself in the process. Looking behind me before crossing the finish line, I could only see Vixen and Livewire, who were both around 1 second behind, and Raptor was nowhere to be seen, so I had hopes for the leaderboard to finally have some diversity. Yeah, sure, that makes sense. So, after 2 hours, I already made significant progress, completing 5 episodes entirely, but this is just the beginning. The 6th episode, however, was not gonna be where the difficulty would become an issue, as I easily won every event on my first attempt, including the Dry Docks Elite Race. With a massive lead, I have now passed the halfway mark of the playthrough, in only 2 hours and 23 minutes. Could that mean that I can finish the playthrough in one stream? Well, let me introduce you to the 7th episode. So far, the challenge has been much easier than I expected, but the second half of the run is definitely gonna be a different beast, starting with the first race in Airplane Graveyard, which introduced me to the enemy I met earlier in episode 4, Dead Cars. In my first attempt of this race, I hit a total of 4 car wrecks, which forced me to restart. But in my second attempt, I managed to take the win in the few last turns of the track. The next track, however, is a completely different story. The race that introduces us to Storm Drain is actually a lot more difficult than the previous track, especially when the autopilot does its own thing. After several restarts and 2 chokes at the very end of the race, I finally managed to succeed and take the win safely after spending 12 minutes into this race. The last challenge before the Elite Race was the Airport Terminal Elimination. This event was a bit easier though, as I won after a few tries and another encounter with my favorite enemy. But now it's time for a race that I dreaded since the beginning, the Expressway Elite Race. This race isn't at the advantage of the Brawler because of the long final straight with no power play, where AIs can easily rubber band past you. But after only 2 attempts and this funny clip, this happened.
Can I do it? Oh, no, they're gonna rubber band. I might have to block.
The leaderboard remaining static, I headed up towards episode 8. And the first race I played in this episode proved to be hard, but after encountering my longtime enemy, a few major skill issues, and a very unlucky power play, I got a very lucky start where I took first place very early and managed to keep it all the way through. The next race, Port Bridge Elimination, was gonna cause me some trouble as well, but I managed to take the win quickly after showing how bad my blocking skills are. The next race being on Power Plant made it extremely easy for me as I won in my first attempt. The Elite Race being on the same track, it wasn't much harder as I took first place on my second attempt, even if the race was extremely action-packed for most of the race, with some insane close calls. Quick check at the leaderboard. So after the first stream, I already completed 8 episodes out of 12. I was determined to finish this, so the next day I started another stream. And as I started the 9th episode, it surprisingly went flawlessly. I was afraid that the first race was gonna be tough as it's on expressway, but it was actually so easy that I slowed down to get a few extra breaks. The next race wasn't much harder either, but it had some interesting moments and also a bit of skill issues. The Elite Race almost went as well as those 2 races, but I unfortunately got overtaken before the last corner because of my lack of engine power. This would have been my fastest episode if I didn't have to retry this. Fortunately, my second attempt was a success, and I can safely head towards the 10th episode. And that's where the challenge truly begins. And as you can already see in the first 5 seconds, this is completely different compared to the opponents of the previous episode. The AIs are literally flying. The only way I have to win is to rely on my driving skill and good power play strategies. I went through power plant elimination in a few minutes, the last turn being my main weakness it seems. But then it was time for Canyon Race. Just as in power plant, the AIs pull away very quickly. I could catch up and overtake them by using some power plays, like the ones under the bridge, as I can activate them from pretty far away. But I wouldn't be able to keep the AIs behind me, so after a couple of tries I came up with a decent strategy. I would stay behind for 2 laps, not using any power play, and activate the dam during the last lap. This way I would still have a lot of power plays to use if the AIs overtake me again in the last lap, but it's also risky because they can use power plays against me. After several attempts, I finally managed to get first place in this event. It took me 23 minutes though, but now it's time for the elite race. This time it was much easier as, after a rough first try, I got an attempt where I managed to get into the lead in the beginning of the second lap and maintain that lead for the entire race. But this episode is still unfinished, since I just unlocked the Canyon elimination bonus event, and I think I'm just gonna show you the end of my first attempt. Knowing that the difficulty would only increase from now, I quickly jumped into the 11th episode, starting with an eliminator on Storm Drain. Just look how fast they are disappearing from the screen. I needed to play extremely well, my drift needed to be perfect, or I would be out of range for any power play. But after several second places and this, I got lucky and took the lead, which made me win the race. After that, I headed towards the airplane graveyard elimination. This one was a bit easier, I only needed to kill everyone in the beginning and drive correctly for the end of the race. But despite being easier, I still struggled a bit, especially when I took a perfectly timed crane power play in the face, 2 seconds before the end of the race. But in the following attempt, the AI was way worse at timing power plays, which allowed me to win the race and move on to the next event. The next event being on Airport Terminal, I haven't got too many issues winning it, succeeding on my second try. And after a ridiculously bad desert run survival, it was time for the Canyon Elite race. This time I didn't even use the strategy that I elaborated in the previous episode, since I got the win after just a few tries, with my only strategy being to keep the damn power play for the last lap. The race was still tough though. Fortunately, Raptor and Vixen were in last and second to last place halfway through the race, but I crashed several times and the end was extremely close as I wrecked Torpedo in the last turn and managed to block Livewire in the last straight, which finally brought one single difference in the leaderboard, as for the first time, the second place isn't held by one of the S510s. After all of that, we are finally reaching the last episode of the season, and I can guarantee you that the run is actually far from finished. So after spending 10 seconds crawling from the FX 350 to the Brawler, I started the Expressway Eliminator event. And so far, this was honestly the hardest event since the beginning. I had almost no opportunity to break the AIs, and I struggled to get anything better than a 6th place in the beginning. On my 3rd attempt I got 5th, but I was so far back that I didn't hit anyone with the train route change. But while the tunnel disappeared in the backrooms, I kept grinding until I finally got an attempt where I was close enough to the leader, powerplayed him, and took the win. So now it was time for the last canyon race, the last step before the final elite race. And this one was equally as hard if not harder than the expressway elimination. The last power plays were extremely hard to dodge, so I could be in the lead during the last lap and lose everything in the last couple of turns, especially with this crane, in that left-handed 180 turn, which killed me a lot of times. But fortunately, after more than 20 minutes of tries, I was overtaken by 2 AIs right before that train, so I was able to trigger it in order to not hit it myself, and killed them with the very next power play, which gave me a comfortable lead and let me win the race. Now I only needed to do a couple of easy events before the final elite race. And now it's finally time for the finale. the very last event in the game, and in our case the hardest by far. My strategy here was to trigger the tower route change at the end of the first lap, since it was the only power play that could reach the leaders and give me a chance to catch up. I was also trying to avoid using power plays during the first lap to keep as many power play opportunities as I could for lap 2 and 3. After 15 minutes, I got into the lead for the first time. Yes, it took me 15 minutes to take the lead for a split second. But now I had to keep that lead. I was overtaken every 5 seconds and had to use as many power plays as I could. But sadly, I crashed in the rooftop section of the track, putting me all the way back to 7th place. So I kept retrying. One of my main issues was that the AIs respawned on the normal path after the tower route change, which is faster than the new path, often putting the AIs respawning in that path in a comfortable lead. Later, I got another promising run, but Raptor somehow managed to avoid the giant dump truck and pulled away far enough so I couldn't catch up anymore. A few minutes later, I got a really promising attempt where I kept the lead for quite a long time, but unfortunately, the hammer decided that it was time for him to stop being 6th in every single race, and overtook me just before the finish line. The very next attempt was also promising, but I got unlucky with the tanker power play at the start of the 3rd lap, as the trigger icon disappeared a tiny bit too early, which let Raptor pull away very quickly in the next straight line. At this point I was getting more and more promising attempts, and I felt like I was getting closer to the win. This attempt wasn't gonna be the one though, as the autopilot decided to do a 90-degree turn straight into the bridge that I just collapsed. Thank you again, autopilot.
Sub 8 hours is not gonna happen.
And as I said that, I started a new attempt. One more fail would cost me the sub 8 hour run that I was aiming for when I started the second stream. But as I exited the route change in 2nd place, right behind Raptor, I was in a good spot for a successful attempt. I briefly took the win after wrecking him and overtaking the hammer, who also overtook me. Raptor came back very quickly and overtook me again, with an insane speed difference, but I was always able to either wreck him or block him. I took back the lead in the tunnel after wrecking Brown, who somehow was in the lead at this moment. I wasn't safe though. It was only a matter of seconds before my opponents catch back up to me. I managed to defend my position pretty well until the last turn, where I took a bad line on purpose to avoid being dive bombed. And here is how it ended.
Yes, yes, yes!
This finish was insane. The difference between me and 4th place was only a quarter of a second, and the 2nd and 3rd were both 1/10 or less behind me. If the finish line was just 5 meters further, I would have lost. And on this incredible ending, I completed split second at 100% with the Ryback Brawler, in just under 8 hours. I hope you enjoyed the video, leave a like if that's the case, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of content. You can also check out my Twitch channel where I regularly stream split second and sometimes other racing games, the link is in the description. That's it for today, take care and I see you next time.